Hello, Newscast. I love having some walk-on music. I might do that every week. Insist on it.
I always wonder, when a politician's doing that thing of picking someone out, have they actually spotted someone they know, or do they just
No,
think,
of course not.
that's
It's like, hi. Just to be clear, though, we did get permission from Friendly Fires to use that song, unlike Boris Johnson, who used it as his walk-on music at the Tory party conference in Manchester this week, and the band said we didn't approve it. Which is actually, Laura, a staple of conference coverage, isn't it? That basically happens every year.
I was going to say, it's a classic move. Politicians' team picks popular tune, play popular tune, hip band act says, I don't like those politicians, gets across about it, and it is a standard story, I'm
What was
afraid.
it? Yeah, Johnny Marr saying, David Cameron, stop saying you like the Smiths. I just don't like them.
Yeah, standard. But Adam, if you're going to have music every week, what kind of vibe, what kind of thing would you just have different, mix it
Katy
all
Perry.
Oh,
up?
Roar by Katy Perry.
Yeah, I was going to say
That's my warm-up. So I play that in my head before every episode anyway. Why do you think I'm so full of beans? Right, more beans, less music on this edition of Newscast.
Newscast from the BBC.
Hello, it's Adam in the studio.
And Chris in the studio.
And it's Laura, not in the studio.
And we're joined by former Housing and Local Government Secretary Robert Jenrick, who is now sadly no longer in that job, but it does mean he's free to come on weirdly timed TV programmes and podcasts.
Hello there,
Welcome.
Good evening.
And I see you're dressing down these days. We're used to seeing you in a suit. You're in a much more cash kind of mode now.
Well, there's definitely some advantage of not having to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning to do the morning media round. I can have a few more lions from now on.
What, you mean you didn't enjoy that?
BBC more than Piers Morgan.
Okay, I suppose, okay, yeah, it's all relative, isn't it? Yeah, how are you since the Prime Minister kind of said he didn't require your services anymore?
I'm good. I mean, I'm treating it as a enforced sabbatical, and it's an opportunity to see my kids more and concentrate on the issues that I care about.
So you think you'll be back?
Well, I don't know. I mean, politics is a winding road. This may be a detour, but who knows?
How was the whole process? How exactly does it work when the Prime Minister has sort of grim news to impart?
Well, it's a very Boris-like conversation where there's a lot of, well, you were brilliant, you're a great friend, I enjoy working with you, but then you kind of know where the conversation is heading. But we continue to be friends, and who knows what the future holds.
We should also talk about just what's happening with people's bills, and there's been more kind of dramatic news in the energy markets, which could have a knock-on effect to how much people pay. And there's no one who's better at totting up what people pay than Martin Lewis, the money-saving expert.
Hello.
Hello. And so, Martin, you're about to record the Martin Lewis Money Show live just after you've spoken to us.
I am indeed, yes, and I've switched this morning the subject from bank switching and getting money back from your bank to talk energy prices, because even though I did a show on it 2 weeks ago, things have just got so much worse in the last 2 weeks. It is shocking.
To bring us up to date, Martin, where are we right now? Because, I mean, this is all moving pretty quickly, isn't it?
So let's do a contrast. A month ago, the energy price cap, the default tariff that you move on to when your fix ends or if you've never switched, was at £1,138 a year for someone with typical bills. Now, that price cap is £1,277 a year, up 12%, 13% for people on prepay. But here's the real shocker, and this is all on the back of wholesale gas prices going up, which, of course, remember, feed into electricity prices too, because so much of the UK's electricity is generated by gas. The price cap was £1,138 a year on typical bills. It's now £1,277 a year. From the 1st of April next year, that price cap is based on the wholesale rates from August to January. So we are in that assessment period, and the current estimate is on the 1st of April, the price cap will rise to £1,660, a 30% rise in the price cap. That is monumental. It is destructive for most people's bills. It means year on year, they will be shouldering, even if you're on the price cap, a £400, £500 odd rise.
I'm going to use a technical fiscal term here, which is ouch.
And Martin, from time to time, there are these spikes and then they go away. And from time to time, there is a real kind of frenzy of concern about energy bill hikes, and then it seems to fade. But this kind of seems different. I mean, this just seems like these prices are on a sort of escalator that's whizzing up. Can you give us some kind of context? Because I know you've studied all of this stuff for years. What does this moment feel like to you?
I've never, I mean, first of all, I never thought I'd be in the position where my advice to people is to do nothing, because it'll put you onto the default tariff. That default tariff, I've always said, I've never been the biggest fan of the price cap. I've always said it might be a fair tariff, but it isn't a good tariff. You can save hundreds by switching. Well, that's gone. You can't. I mean, my show tonight, the questions are flooding in. Everyone's saying, should I do this? And I just keep saying, do nothing, which I can't believe. But, you know, what you have to look at the maths of this now. Remember, let's just talk about that next April price cap. It's a 6-month assessment period. We're 2 months through that, a third of the way through that. For prices not to rise heavily in April, they would have to fall tomorrow to below the lowest that they were in the middle of the pandemic. I mean, that's the scale, because it's an average over 6 months, unless the government changes the metric, unless the metric is changed. So we absolutely have cast iron certainty it's going up in April. It's almost certainly going up a lot. And even if, you know, everything were to change and wholesale gas prices were to come down to a more reasonable level, they were to halve next week, they'd still be going up by 15, 20% come next April, and they've already gone up 12%. I mean, there's nothing like this. And I don't normally defend energy companies, my job's to look after the consumer, but I do find it somewhat, I have a wry smile when what the government has said is, we won't support failed business models about all the energy companies that are failing, when the price cap is effectively forcing them to sell energy at 30% below their cost. I'm not sure you can say that's a failed business model. Yes, some of them should have hedged and hedged better, but not all of them. And what it's going to do is, the government believes in a competitive market in energy. Well, you're absolutely destroying that competitive market. There may be less than 10 providers left, all the old big monopoly ones that we wanted to try and break their monopoly. So if this is short term, what the government is doing at the moment is effectively destroying the market for the long term.
Martin,
and I think that's a bit short-sighted.
Martin, you mentioned the government there. Let's bring Robert back in. Robert, reflect on what you've just heard there from Martin and what your constituents in Newark are saying about this, with the prospect of bills shooting up.
Well, I think the biggest issue in the months ahead is going to be the cost of living, and how does the economy respond to the growing pains of reopening and recovering after the pandemic. And energy prices are clearly going to be one part of that, but inflationary pressures are going to be there on all sorts of things across the economy. The Bank of England and others would lead us to believe this is going to be transitory and it will work its way out of the system quite quickly. My sense is that it's going to be with us for longer than that, and is going to be very challenging for all of us, but particularly for those people on low incomes. And so this is going to be the big political question of at least the next 6 months, possibly the next year or more, and the government needs to be responding to this.
Do you think they are taking it seriously enough, Robert? Because when we sat down with Boris Johnson this week and he said, oh, I'm not worried about this. I'm not worried because it will work its way through. And do you think to some people that sounds like a bit of a tin ear?
Well, I think it will work its way through. It's not unique to the UK. It's happening all over the world. You're seeing.
Yeah, but if you can't pay your bills, you're not really bothered about whether it's going to work its way through in 6 months.
That's right. I mean, I do think this is going to be with us for at least 6 months, maybe significantly longer. And if you're seeing inflation of 2, 3, 4, 5%, maybe even higher, small businesses that I speak to are saying that they're having to put up their prices very significantly. You know, everything is rising, from the cost of labour, materials, shipment, containerised products from the Far East, for example, going up hundreds and hundreds of percent. I think this is going to be extremely challenging, and we're going to have to be really alive to this. I do think the Prime Minister understands that. Of course,
what in practical terms, though, Robert, can or should the government do?
Well, there's a question, I think, for the Bank of England as to what it does, and I think it's let inflation get a little bit out of control, so we'll have to see how they choose to respond in the months ahead. But the government is going to have to be extremely focused on the day-to-day costs that it's imposing on people. Energy price, of course, we've just been discussing is one. Further taxes is another one. as former local government secretary, I'm aware that the next tax question will be council tax, and that will be settled at the spending review in a couple of weeks' time. That will be a significant extra cost for a lot of low and middle income families who are households and will have to...
You calling for a council tax freeze then, Robert?
Well, I don't think that's realistic, because council tax has to pay for social care and a load of other important public services. But I would be nervous if you saw it rising by, say, 5%. It's likely to be a 3-year settlement, and so that could be a 15% increase over the course of this Parliament. That would make me concerned.
Robert, we've got a bit more time with you, but Martin, I know you've got to dash in a sec to do your own show. So before you go off, I just want to ask you, do you think that the government actually have a clue about how serious this is going to feel for people?
No, I don't. I mean, hearing about the Bank of England doing something, I'm not sure what tools the Bank of England have to deal with the supply side squeeze in the way that we've got right now. I think, you know, how long it will be. Look, listen to what I'm saying. The price cap went up on the 1st of October. That price cap lasts 6 months. On the 1st of April, it's going to go up again by a huge amount, and that lasts till the 1st of October next year. So on energy, at least, we know this is lasting a year. Guaranteed this is lasting a year. I think ending the universal credit uplift in the midst of a cost of living crisis was a tin ear, and will leave us with a poverty problem like we haven't seen for the last few years. I think that was a disastrous move. I think it was short-sighted. I'm not saying it should have necessarily lasted forever, but this was not the time to end that. And I think the fact that there wasn't a mention of it in the Prime Minister's speech, for me, of course, I focus on it all the time this week, was a real struggle. The talk on energy prices, you know, we just take the warm home discount, the £140 that those on guaranteed element of pension credit and some on lower incomes get. The plan is to increase that to £150 next April. Well, you know, we've got the price cap go up 12% now, potentially 30% up next April, and they're increasing the help for vulnerable people by £10 from 140 to 150. It's too little, it's too late, and we're going to have people in real poverty. Food banks are going to get a hell of a lot busier, and something needs to be done now. And I understand fiscal and prudent responsibility, but that is a very difficult argument for people to make to people when they can't put food in their kids' mouths.
Martin, thank you very much. I'll let you go and do your other show, because you were speaking to us from the set of the show before it starts. So very meta, very newscast. Thanks for your time when you're so busy.
Cheers. Good luck to you.
Thank you.
Robert, just picking up on that point that Martin was making at the end there about universal credit and the end of the uplift, given the timing, given what else is happening economically, was it a mistake?
I don't think so, but I think it's a very hard decision given what we're now seeing happening within the economy. It was obviously a short-term measure introduced for the right reasons at the height of the pandemic, and it had to be retired at some point. I think the question that Martin is raising is this the point, or should it have been extended for a little longer? I think those arguments will probably always be made, even if the Chancellor decided to extend it by another 6 months or a year. It's very difficult in politics to take a benefit away from people. Successive governments have felt that. But not to do so would then make it very hard for any future government to respond to a crisis of any level, certainly one of the scale of COVID, by introducing something like this, because they would be aware that it would be almost impossible ever to withdraw it. So I think it probably was the right decision, but we've now got to be very careful about how we load further costs on members of the public in terms of taxation and other things, and how we try to increase wages in a sustainable way. Wages are rising. That's extremely good news, but it's got to be sustainable, and that's about productivity rather than simply increasing costs, because that will just flow through into the prices that we all pay for goods and services in the shops.
Now, looking back at your old department, and you were talking about some of the things that the government can control, because, of course, the government can't control the global price of gas. Are there other tools that you think the government could deploy, maybe in other departments other than your old one? Or do you think we're going to have to invent some new stuff to help people through this?
Well, the heart of the government strategy is creating jobs and trying to ensure that real wages rise. And as I say, on both of those fronts, there's good news. We are creating a lot of jobs. There's a huge number of vacancies, over 1 million in the economy right now, and wages are rising. we need to make sure that's a sustainable increase. And there's some evidence that it is in some sectors, others it's not. If you pay somebody £80,000 a year to drive an HGV vehicle, but there's no innovation or increase in output or productivity, then that's just going to flow through into the cost of those goods in the shops. And so that's not, in the long term, going to be helpful to anyone. There's no such thing as a free lunch here.
Do you think HGV drivers' wages should start going back down again then?
No, I don't want to see that. I think that probably will happen in the longer term. The problem in that market was obviously that people have been paid too little and the conditions were poor, and so younger people didn't want to go into it. If the current situation encourages those businesses to treat their employees better, to provide better terms and conditions, to ensure that the service stations and so on are more attractive, then that's a good thing. But we shouldn't kid ourselves into thinking that necessarily means that the country gets wealthier, that living standards can rise, that we're a more productive economy. And
that's what the Prime Minister's suggesting, Robert, though. That's basically the case that Boris Johnson's been making all week. He's been saying, oh, look, well, if wages go up, then actually we'll be a high wage, much more prosperous country, high skill, high pay, it'll all be fine. Now, actually, there's been a lot of question marks from economists and business over the last sort of 72 hours about whether or not, just from an purely economic point of view, that doesn't necessarily stack up. And it's certainly a gamble. I mean, you do sound like you feel a bit sort of nervous about this stuff.
Well, I think that is true in some sectors and some parts of the economy. So if you're a food processing business that has been reliant on importing low-skilled, low-wage workers, say from Eastern Europe, instead of investing in that workforce, investing in technology and automation to make the business more productive, then the transition that we're in at the moment in the economy may be a good thing, because that business may become more productive by investing in its future. And the Chancellor has made available a super deduction to help companies to invest in just that sort of technology.
Can I just push you on that, though? Because
the economy.
Can I just push you on that, though? Because there's no automatic link between having lower immigration and having more productivity. I mean, it sounds like a really technical point, but the Prime Minister keeps saying this. He keeps putting this forward as this sort of new economic model. And actually, when you look at countries that are more productive, they've often, too, got quite similar levels of quite high immigration, just like the UK has. And he's making that link, and it's not necessarily the case.
Well, as I say, I think it's true in some parts of the economy. Food processing, the construction sector, which could be embracing modern methods of construction instead of relying on imported labour. But it won't be true across the whole of the economy. The way that you do this sustainably is, as you say, to increase productivity. And to do that, you need a raft of pro-enterprise economic growth policies. And we have many of those. There's clearly going to be a big drive now on skills and education. There is an increase in investment in infrastructure, including the basic stuff that really drives productivity, like broadband or better local roads or bus services. When I was at my former department, we really tried to increase the supply of new houses, because that's a way of tackling the cost of living and helping businesses to prosper with a simpler planning system. So those are the sorts of policies that are really going to make the difference. Now, that difference won't happen immediately, but it will start to feed through in the months and the years to come.
I'm struck, Robert, that you're still very loyal to the government. So that's no surprise, because you were proud to serve in it, and you would have carried on serving in it had the Prime Minister asked you to. I just wonder more broadly, as we reflect on the conference season in the next few minutes on the podcast, I just wonder more broadly, since you've left government, are there particular things that now you're outside of government you don't think they're quite getting right?
Well, I think the challenge ahead, as I say, will be twofold, really. The first thing will be to be laser-like in our focus on the cost of living. And we mustn't be complacent about that, about inflation, because I think the economy could really bite us if we don't tackle that. And the second thing is delivering on levelling up. We've been an unusual government because we came in, we got Brexit done, and then we found ourselves immersed in the all-consuming nature of the pandemic. But now we're midterm, we've got to deliver on that promise to level up all parts of the country. And I think you heard more about what that means at this conference. It means better local leadership, like getting more mayors and powers to local councils. It means focusing on public services, on health inequalities, on skills and education. It means trying to raise productivity.
That list of things that are going to get leveled up is getting longer and longer every day, isn't it? Well, that's kind of everything now.
We have tried. I think there has been a greater definition to it, but that I think now is the fundamental challenge for the government.
And housing, presumably. I mean, levelling up for a lot of people is about getting onto the property ladder, for instance, isn't it? And I know you were very passionate in government about building more houses. We've seen the kind of wobbles within Conservative ranks about the numbers and the location of new houses. Is there a danger that the government sort of isn't as committed to that as you think it maybe should be?
Well, I hope that's not the case, because I don't think the government will achieve its objectives unless it takes housing seriously. Housing is a huge driver of the cost of living. You know, young people are spending between 30 and 50% of their income on rent. So you've got to increase the supply of homes, and you've got to increase it in the places that they want to live. On that? And the planning system is the obvious supply-side reform that's out there. Successive governments have failed to tackle it. So when I was in office, I was willing to do that. It was difficult. It's always contentious. It's amongst the most contentious subjects. But I think the government would regret it. Maybe not at the next election, but if we were sat here in 10 years' time, 15 years' time, we would regret not having tackled housing really seriously.
Do you think they're wobbling on it? Do you think they are sort of being more cautious than they should be?
Well, we don't know yet, is the honest answer. You know, Michael Gove, my successor, has arrived at the department, is considering how to proceed. We've just done in the last year or two some of the biggest reforms to the planning system for the last 10 or 20 years, things like completely reforming the use class orders, so you can turn a hairdresser's into a cafe, into a home, enabling people to build upwards, enabling people to demolish and rebuild derelict properties. So we've done some big things in the last year or two, but we've also got more proposals, and the Prime Minister encouraged those. His speech at the last conference was build, build, build. It was a speech about the central importance of house building to economic growth and to helping people onto the housing ladder. And of course, I'm a big advocate of that. I think that's absolutely right. And I hope that we do seize this opportunity and not let it slip through our fingers.
So, Robert, just to be precise, what is the status of the big radical reforms to the planning system that you proposed last year? I mean, I've heard they've been paused, I've heard they've been junked, I've heard they've gone into reverse. What's actually happening?
Well, I honestly don't know. We'll have to wait and see. We did do a lot of those reforms over the course of the last year or so.
But then they stopped when you left office, didn't they? I mean, it's as simple as that.
Well, we'd prepared the response to our white paper, which is the next set of reforms, and that was ready to go. I understand that Michael Gove is reading that and considering what he wants to do, and that's absolutely right. It's now his decision how to proceed. As I say,
hang on, Robert. Hang on a minute, though. You know, you out there as a cabinet minister, you took an absolute pasting from quite a lot of people in your own party, from quite a lot of powerful voices outside government about the reforms that you wanted to press on. You're saying now clearly that the government mustn't let this opportunity slip through their fingers. You must surely feel a bit sore about it. You were out there defending it. You get rid of the algorithm that was meant to be part of it. But there was controversial stuff that I'm pretty sure you believed in at the time. And at the very least, the government's pressed pause.
Well, look, I'm a reformer by instinct. I believe that you go into politics to achieve things, and your time in government is always shorter than you think, and you should use it to try to achieve lasting change. And housing is one of those areas where you can make a huge difference, helping people onto the housing ladder, reducing the cost of living, increasing productivity, helping small businesses. It cuts across all of the government's priorities. And so I strongly urge the Prime Minister to stick with it. Of course, there's always ways to refine and improve proposals, listen to people's perfectly legitimate concerns, but don't lose heart, because I do think that it's something that we will regret. Rather like social care, it's one of those fundamental challenges facing the country, and a government equipped with an 80-strong majority is in an incredibly fortunate position and should be trying to tackle those difficult questions.
Politely, diplomatically, you're basically saying they've got to crack on with this and not bottle it.
Yeah, that's my view.
Also, you own quite a few houses. You could sell one of them, couldn't you? That would help.
Should we talk about the conference season?
Yes.
I want to talk about conferences, because it's why I'm wearing a pink shirt today, because it was the only clean one left in my in the cupboard, because we've spent the last couple of weeks on the road. Great that everyone's back together. Great to be able to talk to people. That incidental chat stuff that didn't happen during the pandemic. I wonder, Laura, just briefly, I must ask Robert about your experience going along as a backbencher. Laura, your reflections on conference season?
I think that it was very important for both the big parties to see each other face to face. I think that in narrow party terms, in terms of their own tribes, I think both Keir Starmer and Boris Johnson had quite a good week. Boris Johnson, the easy metaphor, but there isn't a better one. He had a big giant stage. Everyone else was on a tiny little one in the hall. He absolutely displayed his current level of enormous power over his party. Similarly, Keir Starmer managed to get some rule changes, not all of them, but he tightened his grip on the party machine. And that also has sort of emboldened his leadership position. And I think, so for party terms, both of them had a pretty decent ride. In broader terms, they're both still facing absolutely enormous problems. Keir Starmer in terms of, Labour's polling position, what the party really stands for, what he really wants to do with it, how can they feel like they're really relevant and in the debate again under him. But for Boris Johnson, I think, the really urgent, acute problems that we were hearing about from Martin, and there's real question marks over whether the government's got anything like the solutions to actually stop people having to go through something really pretty tough in the next few months. And a message of kind of, short-term pain, long-term gain. Well, from a political point of view, that's something you can put forward. But in real life, how's that going to feel in January?
And Robert, you're now freed of the collective responsibility that applies to people in the cabinet. What are you going to do with your newfound freedom? You can go out and say whatever you want now.
Well, in some respects, I'm looking forward to that. Yeah, absolutely. I think I've done more media rounds than any other member of cabinet in the last couple of years. So
I know I was there for many of them, first thing in the morning.
The ability to speak my mind will be a good thing.
And what do you take with you, Robert, out of your time in that last government job? You've talked about all things housing. Is there anything else that you've come out of that job thinking, you know what, I was doing that for the government, but now I'm going to carry on running with a particular thing?
I think the most obvious one actually is homelessness, which is an issue I became very passionate about during my time in the department. And Dame Louise Casey and I established the Everyone In programme during the height of the pandemic, which helped to get 90% of people who were sleeping rough on the streets off and into safer accommodation. Again, there's the danger there that those gains will be lost because there are headwinds with the cost of living and unemployment and so on. And so that definitely is something that I want to keep going on. That's one of those issues which I think will stick with me.
And now that you're free to speak your mind and tell us what really goes on, did you witness just an absolutely massive cock-up at any point that you can now tell us about what actually happened? Or is there anything that we just totally got the wrong end of the stick about that just really sticks in your mind?
Well, look, there are lots of cock-ups in government, cock-ups rather than conspiracies. So, but I think you'll have to wait for my memoirs to read that.
It's only the three of us here. It's only the three of us here, Robert.
But
did you keep a diary? Are you going to write memoirs, or is that just that's a politician joke, isn't it?
I'm only teasing you. No, definitely not.
Well, we'd have you on if you wanted to plug it.
Shameless. Well, if it's only a sabbatical, then you'll have plenty more chapters to write anyway. Robert, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks. Nice to be here.
Thanks, Robert.
And that's it for this edition of Newscast. We'll be back with another one very soon. And we're working on quite a special, unique television episode for next Thursday night. Stay tuned, as they say in proper showbiz. Bye.
So fancy. Bye-bye.
Newscast from the BBC.